Welcome to the Hermann Gmeiner Academy, all of us who are here present, and right outside there are colleagues from different parts of the world who will be joining in one after the other. We have to speak English today because we have international guests. We hope our colleagues there on virtually can hear us and understand us. Please, if you cannot hear us or understand, give us a signal. Just write a message in the chat box. But those who are here, we're happy you can understand us now. So with the translation service, please enjoy it. Once more, welcome here. This is Hermann Gmeiner Academy of the SOS Children's Villages. Every year we try to organize 2 or 3 times such discussions on development cooperation. International organizations everywhere there are need to work in cooperation with other organizations, with governments, with partners, with friends. Otherwise, the big work cannot be managed by one organization alone. The cooperation of donors, individual donors, cooperation of people who give services in one way or the other, all these are necessary. But we have seen that the problem in the world is getting bigger and bigger. And the help, partnership, collaboration are needed more and more. So how can we go about it? How can we get the people to join this call for justice, for solidarity, and for service to humanity? That's why we organize these talks 2 or 3 times every year. This time around, we're able to get a person in the capacity of Mr. Karim EL Gawhary. We discovered that here in Austria, he is a very, very staunch personality. He's respected and he's liked. We decided to make it public. Let the people of Tyrol, Austria, those who are around, let them come and see him. Let them come and discuss with him, share with him. So that's why you people are here today. We thank you for responding to our call. Thank you so much. You're welcome. Karim EL Gawhary is a German Egyptian, a renowned journalist. This is for our colleagues who are outside there, virtually. I think everyone here knows him. He's a bestseller author, and he is the head of Austrian news media in Cairo, and a correspondent to very, very many German newspapers. Karim, you're welcome to us.
Thank you very much.
I apologize. I apologize for the few hectic we had in the morning, but I thank you for coming early. Otherwise, it would have been critical. Technique can sometimes be crazy, and I'm not the most perfect on it, but we're able to manage it. That is fine. One point is very, very clear. Every suffering, every pain, every disappointment, every injustice in this world needs to be witnessed. There must be people who witness to injustices in the world. SOS Children's Villages bears witness to these injustices through our work in 134 countries in the world. In the Middle East, through emergency response programs. Everywhere there is conflict, SOS bears witness with our presence, with our work. Journalists, I think, this is also the work they do. They bear witness to the sufferings in the world. They bear witness to injustices in the world. The question then is, how do they do it? I think it is from this conviction that I was able to say, no, I have to invite Karim EL Gawhary because he is a very wonderful example to how this work or this witness bearing to human suffering can be done with dignity, with respect, and at eye level. I thought I was the only one thinking of such things. I give you one or two anecdotes. I was in the city of Innsbruck 2 days ago, in the Malateresen Street. I was sitting in a cafe with a friend, and three people behind us were talking, a man and two women. They were talking about the recent use of chemical weapons in Syria. They were discussing politics, and all of a sudden, the man said he likes Karim EL Gawhary so much, and he likes listening to him because he reveals social suffering and human beings without undressing them. He reveals social problems with dignity and respect. And I heard that. I got up and gave him this invitation I have here. And I'm happy to see him here today. Please, applause for him. I came into this house. People come in here for their workshops, for their seminars. I was just passing by. A woman was standing by the door and reading our announcement. She said, "Oh, Karim is coming here. Oh, I like that man so much." And I stopped again. And this person repeated almost the same thing that person in the coffee said. And I was very, very pleased. So that was when I got home and I said, I've not been wasting my time sitting before the television watching him. And I think we all do that. Those of us who spend their evening in front of the television watching him report, the joy you get, I think, is what has brought you here today. So applause for all of you who are here. Thank you so much. Living and coping with war, violence against men, children in the Middle East. How can civil society, civil organizations cooperate better for better and effective results? Karim, you're welcome. The floor is open to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for this introduction that I'm really blushing from. No, thank you very much for the invitation to Innsbruck. Good morning, everybody. So I was not very clear what I'm talking today about when we were talking on the telephone, but I decided myself that I will focus on just a few individual stories of children I experienced in the last years during my work, and just basically I will tell their stories and a few facts around them to just get some kind of mosaic of different fates of children within conflict in the Middle East. And I will start with these 4 girls. These are the girls of Soha. Soha is a Syrian woman who escaped from Damascus, came to Egypt, came to the port city of Alexandria, the Mediterranean, and got a deal with a trafficker to go over the sea to Italy with her 4 children. And so she did. The boats leaving the Egyptian coast normally leave at night because that way they think that they're not discovered by the Egyptian Coast Guard. So this boat left, and not far from the Egyptian coast, the boat finally sank. Soha was the mother, was the only one who had a life vest on. And she was telling the story, how she was swimming there in the Mediterranean at night. She with the life vest and her 4 daughters clinging at her. And she was telling the story how she was trying to stay above water, but of course, like a life vest doesn't carry 5 people. And then she said, I knew at that moment I have to decide if anyone has to survive here. I have to decide which one of my children I let go. And then she said, I couldn't decide. I could not decide which one of them to let go. And then she was just waiting what's going to happen. And then the small one, the 3-year-old one, was the first one who was diving away in the Mediterranean in the middle of the night. And then her second daughter drowned. Then her third daughter drowned. And then she was picked up by the Egyptian Coast Guards with her oldest daughter, Soha, and her oldest daughter. So at least she could tell us her story. I mean, there are thousands of stories like that in the Mediterranean over the last years. And I think we nearly stopped counting how many people died and drowned in the Mediterranean. I think last year it was, we know of at least 4,000. This is Ibrahim. It's another story of a Syrian refugee. He was with a group of 140 refugees, also among them 40 children, also leaving from the Egyptian coast, this time during the day. And the boat left, and the boat was discovered by the Egyptian Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard told the boat to stop. And of course the traffickers got scared and continued on. And so the Coast Guard shot at this boat, basically doing the job of the Europeans. I think Egypt is the only country that shoots at refugees who are trying to leave the country. Two refugees were killed, were shot on the boat on this day. And the rest, 140 minus 2, were brought back to the coast, where I met them at the police station near Alexandria. And there I met Ibrahim. He's 13 years old. He is the one whose mother was shot right beside him on the boat on that day. I met him a week later. And I mean, I'm doing this job now since 25, 26 years, but there are always moments where I really don't know what to say. What do you say to Ibrahim? So I asked him, I said, like, Ibrahim, what would you have done if you would have made with your mama, if you made it with your mama to Europe? And his answer was, I would have been finally back in school. I have no idea where Ibrahim is today. I know that Soha, who I spoke first about, she is now in Sweden with her oldest daughter, working there as a nurse. But she's a traumatized woman. Now this is a little fellow I met in Beirut, and there are thousands of them. Children who basically work, Syrian refugees, children who work and who are not going to school, and working to ensure the survival of their families. Just a few numbers about schooling and Syrians. Before the conflict, 94% of Syrian children were enrolled in a school. Today, within Syria, this number is down to 60%. Even worse for the Syrian refugee children outside the country. We have numbers from UNHCR from last year. Turkey, 39% of the Syrian refugee children are enrolled in school. That makes more than 60% not in school. Lebanon, 40% enrolled in school. Again, 60% of the Syrian refugee children not in school. Jordan is a bit better, 70% in school, 30% out of school. So we have an estimate that about 900,000 Syrian refugee children are not going to school right now. Now that is a time bomb. I mean, we're talking here about the generation who one day is the generation who has to reconstruct and rebuild their country if, God willing, this conflict will be over one day. So this is a generation of which many never saw a school from inside. It's a generation that is going to be easy to manipulate them. It's going to be easy to radicalize them. So I think we will hear from this generation of Syrian children, and it will be not good news we will hear. Syria is not unique. This is not my picture. This is a picture from the International Red Cross. This is a classroom in Yemen. Yemen. Yemen is disastrous also when it comes to school and children. We have 2 million children in Yemen not going to school. At least 1,449 schools, nearly 1,500 schools were destroyed during this war. We have, that makes like basically 2 schools per day since the conflict started. We have another nearly 150 schools that are not used as schools but used as camps for internally displaced people in Yemen. We have at least 24 schools who are used by the military. And we have 70% of the teachers in the country who didn't get their salary since 6 months and don't know how to survive with their own families. No? Yes. This is a picture I took in Mosul, in the eastern part of Mosul, where I've been a few weeks ago. That's the part of Mosul that the Iraqi army reconquered from ISIS. We have a situation in Mosul where 100,000 people, 100,000 children had to leave the city. And there are still many trapped in the fighting of Western Mosul, which is a brutal house-to-house fighting, which is going on now since weeks. And life there, I think, is really hell on earth right now. I mean, first, there are no supplies for the people. Second, ISIS is using civilians and children, it's documented, as human shields. There is film material where you can see ISIS fighters carrying little children crossing the street so they're not fired upon. And at the same time, of course, these children are also victims of bombardment of the anti-ISIS coalition and air bombardments. Because we have a lot of civilian death in this war right now. This is a picture I got from in a kindergarten in Beirut. It's from 8-year-old Abdallah in Syria. That's what he's drawing. You can see the airplanes flying. You can see people ripped upon in pieces, blood all over the place. You can see the bombs falling. But it's an 8-year-old child that drew this picture. And that doesn't come out of his fantasy. I mean, something like this, no 8-year-old child is drawing except it experienced something like that. And I think this picture is, I don't know, I think it's very telling. And it's like, this speaks more than many newspaper articles about Syria or many TV stories we've seen. When an 8-year-old draws a picture like this. And they had in the kindergarten, they had a whole stack of them. They showed me, this is one of them I took a picture of. So there are many of them. And that is when she sings. And she has no problem to speak. Yeah, I'm through with my presentation. Not an easy one. But I'm ready for your questions. We can also talk about the wider issues. It doesn't have to do with just a few cases I showed here. But for me, it's kind of important, I think, to show like this mosaic of kids I met in conflict in the last 2 years in the Middle East. So how are we doing this with the questions? How is this organized?
Okay, thank you so much. The floor is yours. Are there any comments? Are there any questions? I hand over the microphone.
Questions can be also in German and then they're translated.
Questions can also
also
be
wir können auch auf
addressed
Deutsch
in
fragen.
German, yes, of course.
Da hinten.
Oh, yeah.
Alles klar. Christian Altenweisel, ich arbeite bei der Abteilung Forschung und Entwicklung im Kinderdorf Österreich. Also danke für die Präsentation. Jetzt muss ich meine Worte erst noch ein bisschen finden, das war sehr eindrücklich. Und dieser Eindruck bleibt jetzt für einige sicher Stunden bei uns zurück. Aber Sie haben schon gesagt, wie schnell es geht, dass Sie zum Beispiel wegen einem angekündigten Blizzard in New York aus der Zeit im Bild zum Beispiel fliegen in der ZIP 2. Und ich würde gern von Ihnen hören, wie Sie das, wie Sie das begreifen, dass die Bilder und die Sprache, die immer brutaler wird, also politisch wie auch medial, damit man Gehör findet. Also Sie erzählen von Mädchen, die gehandelt worden sind, von Kindern, die ihre Traumata aufzeichnen. Wie viel brutaler müssen die Bilder und Sprache werden, damit man auf so wichtige und so schreckliche Konflikte überhaupt noch hinweisen kann, wenn die Medien schon so übersättigt sind und diese wichtigen Botschaften nicht mehr durchkommen, wenn das Bild nicht immer noch brutaler wird und die Leute vielleicht auch aus einem gewissen Selbstschutz abstumpfen gegenüber den Bildern. Was macht das mit Ihnen?
Well, I'm answering in English, right? Okay. Well, I don't think you saw any brutal pictures here. I mean, on purpose in this presentation, I just showed you people and told you the story because I think this is much more effective. It is an issue of discussion with the pictures. I mean, I'm on the other side. You are on the side where you sit somewhere and watch the pictures that are in the news. I'm on the other side of the end. I have to decide which pictures can I still use and which pictures can I not use. And I tell you, there are a lot of pictures we decide not to use. A lot of pictures we decide not to use. I mean, I remember, for example, I was in Libya, in Tripolis, after Gaddafi left. And there was a hospital, which basically was abandoned for weeks. And not only that the people died who were in the hospital because they were not taken care of, but also all the dead people of the fighting were dumped in the hospital. So there were more than 100 dead people in this hospital all over the place. And we went there. You only could go there with a gas mask. You could not bear the rotten smell of humans. So we went in there and we filmed and we stayed there for about an hour and came back. And then we sat there in the hotel in Tripolis and we could not find really pictures we could use for our news report. It was very difficult to find the pictures you can still show. But of course we saw all the pictures and I remember all of them. But this whole picture discussion, I think, is there's not a black and white answer to that. I sometimes, especially on social media, I sometimes use pictures which I think are a little bit over the edge. But I think sometimes it's important to do that. Not too often, because then people kind of get used to it and you escalate the whole situation. But pictures have an impact. And then when sometimes I'm attacked and I'm told that, how can you use these pictures? And my answer is always, we should not discuss if we can or cannot use the pictures. We should discuss to produce a situation where this kind of pictures are not produced. That is the issue. That's the main issue. But it's an ongoing discussion, what kind of pictures you can use. But I still think that it's telling the stories of people can be sometimes much more effective than showing a gruesome picture.
Bitte. Vielleicht auch kurz ganz selber sich vorstellen. Danke.
Mein Name ist Brigitte Neuhäuser. Darf man Sie auch was Persönliches fragen?
Kommt drauf an, darf ich es antworten oder nicht beantworten. Sorry, okay.
Sie haben im Zusammenhang mit diesem Mädchen die Worte Kraft und Stärke verwendet. Woher nehmen Sie Kraft und Stärke? Woraus beziehen Sie die? Welche Tankstelle haben Sie?
Well, it's not easy. I mean, as a job, it's not easy to meet all these people and to be exposed to all this misery. And I'm doing this now since many, many years. I think one of the therapy, it's a therapy for me to retell their stories. If I would just eat up all the stories I just told you, my soul would be probably a ruin right now. But I think the important thing is you can tell the stories of these people, and it makes somehow sense for me. I mean, I would not trade my job with anyone. It makes sense for me because I have the feeling I do something that makes sense. I do something that giving people like Miriam or others I showed you a voice gives sense to my life too. I think that's what gives you the power to do this job.
Bitte.
My name is Stephanie Fenley. I work here for SOS Children's Villages International in monitoring and evaluation. As an international organization, our focus is on child care and on preventing family separation. And as the pictures that you showed us tell stories of really a lot of children who are basically the most vulnerable and the most helpless in such conflict situations, I think as many other organizations, we struggle on deciding where to start. What do you think is the most impactful work that can be done, especially for the children whose stories you tell?
I mean, first of all, you're not the only organization who is struggling where to start. Where do you start, right? I mean, I just 2 weeks ago, I had an interview with somebody from WFP, from the World Food Organization. We were talking about Yemen. Yemen, 7 million people right now under threat of starvation. That's nearly the size of Austria. 7 million people under the threat of starvation. And WFP 2 weeks ago had enough means and money to get food for a third of them. They just had enough money for feeding a third of this 7 million people. So they had to decide what to do. A brutal decision. They had to decide, should we feed only a third of the 7 million people? Or should we try to get all the 7 million people and give them only a third of the ration they need for the day? That is a decision they had to make. And they decided the second. They decided we try to get as many people and give them a third of the ration they need, and hoping that they're somehow going to survive that way. When it comes to what I would suggest, especially with children, I mean, where do you start? I mean, of course, as an organization, you can do, for example, I meet a lot of very, very traumatized people. That is a huge, huge issue. Where does somebody like Miriam go to? There is not much there. There's not much there, and I mean, should you bring her outside Iraq? But that would take her away from her roots. There really no service for trauma. It's not a priority in a wartime to deal with the psychological situation of children. There are other priorities that are bigger. So that would be one of the things that could be done. And yeah, okay.
There is a question from Nicole Nassar from Vienna. How do you think journalists like you, media in general, and NGOs should cooperate? Do you see conflict of interests, and if yes, which ones?
I work together with NGOs and organizations and bigger organizations, and WFP and International Red Cross and Médecins Sans Frontières, and of course I cooperate with them. I sometimes go to places with them because it's the only possibility how I can get to a place. But I would never let them tell me what story I have to do. I mean, I decide if I do something out of it, what I do, how it looks like, how this organization is going to appear or not appear in the story. That's my decision. So I think that is an okay cooperation. You getting to places you may be not able to go, and but you decide the content of the story.
Looking around, is there anyone who would like to address another question, another comment? Yes.
Mein Name ist Meyer Rudolf und ich habe folgende Frage. Es waren Kampfpausen in Aleppo. Aleppo ist eine sehr große Stadt, ich war einmal dort. Und innerhalb von einem Tag sieht man, wie Menschen dort Marktstände aufbauen und Gemüse verkaufen. Für mich ist das sehr schwer vorstellbar. Sind diese Aufnahmen immer authentisch oder werden die gestellt?
I mean, that is a problem with all war and conflict situations, where for us journalists it's difficult to get there. We have to decide what pictures and what YouTube things are authentic and not authentic. This is becoming more and more a big part of our work. But when it comes to conflict, one of the interesting things is that in the most brutal wars, and I've seen many wars. I mean, I've been 2 Palestinian intifadas, I've been in 2 Iraq wars, I've been in war in Lebanon. I mean, I've seen many wars. You always have a glimpse of normality in every war, in every conflict. People just need to move on with their life. It doesn't stop because there's a war. So there are, I mean, I've seen it so many times, situations where like, there's a street in Baghdad where a car bomb goes off. And there may be 100 dead people. And it's carnage. It's like horrible. 2 streets down, people are shopping for their daily needs because they just need to move on. So there's always, of course, we in television, we only see the car bomb. We don't see 2 streets down where people are going shopping. But it's always a part of any war and conflict is a sense of normality, because otherwise people cannot survive.
Yeah. Over here.
Thomas Buchner, SOS Kinder auf Österreich. Sie haben gesprochen über den Jungen, also den Sohn der IS-Kämpfer, der derzeit im Gefängnis ist. Und eine Frage, können Sie abschätzen oder weiß man ungefähr, wie viele solche Kinder es gibt in der Region? Und was würde mit dem oder mit Kindern wie diesem passieren, wenn der jetzt nach Tunesien zum Beispiel zurückgeholt wird?
I mean, the estimates is hundreds of this kind of children, of ISIS orphans. And I mean, we're talking about Libya. I guess if the Tunisian government would get this boy out of Libya, out of the prison, they will put him to an orphanage and they will try to find a family for him in Tunis. It's lucky enough he's too young that ISIS would have used him as a soldier or anything. He's like, in 2 years you can still put him on track for the rest of his life, and that's, I think, what they're trying to do. But it's actually not so easy to get to the place and get him out, and it's not an easy logistical thing. But there are hundreds of these children.
Denken Sie, dass diese Kinder in Zukunft stigmatisiert werden in den Gesellschaften im Nahen Osten, weil sie eben sozusagen aus ISIS-Verbindungen entstanden sind?
I mean, what's the responsibility of a 2-year-old that his 2 parents were ISIS fighters? I mean, that's a non-issue. I think more problematic is when they're getting older and when they were fighting, because they use also children in the fighting. That is a real problem. What do you do with a boy like that? Then it becomes an issue. What do you do with a 16-year-old ISIS fighter when you get him? That's the real issue, not the 2-year-olds. That's easy.
Ja, es wird sportlich.
Mein Name ist Barbara Untertoner, ich bin selbst Journalistin und mich würde es interessieren, gerade weil wir im Westen ja eigentlich auch im Zuge von der Flüchtlingsdiskussion ja hauptsächlich über gesellschaftliche und religiöse Aspekte sprachen. Was würden Sie sagen, was braucht der Nahe Osten eigentlich für einen gesellschaftlichen Wandel, um über die Krise zu kommen? Gibt es da, ja, was braucht er für einen gesellschaftlichen Wandel und was spielt da eigentlich die Frau für eine Rolle?
Uff.
Wieder mal.
Yeah, that would be a question I could talk another 4 or 5 hours about. I think, generally speaking, I think what we need to understand that the Arab world is in a period of change. And it's a very turbulent change. It's a very bloody change. And we're by far not at the end of the story. And that's, I think, one of the things we basically forgot, and media are part of the problem. We as journalists, we do like more or less event journalism. Yeah, we don't report processes. We report events. We basically like firemen who's sitting there with their boots on and they're waiting where next to run to, which house is burning next, right? And so I think we stopped understanding things as political and society processes, long processes. Somebody said once after we got rid of Mr. Mubarak in Egypt, he said, well, we were celebrating like it was an early goal in the second minute. And we were celebrating and everyone was having the party, the whole world. And then he said, we forgot somehow that there are 88 minutes of playtime ahead of us. And that's what it is. This Middle East, this Arab world is in a process of change. We have militant organizations coming out of this situation. We have brutal autocracies and dictatorships and despots. Both for me are two sides of the same coin. They need each other for basically proving their existence. We have to get through that. We have to get through that. And it's like we just have to look at our own history in Europe. French Revolution, a secular France didn't come up in a year. You know, it was revolution, counter-revolution, back, forward. In the Middle East, it's intervention from outside. It's the Gulf states which are having a lot of money, pouring it anywhere where change might be in order to avoid it. There's a lot of factors to it. So that's what we have to understand. And Europe will be part of this process. And Europe will be part of this process if we like it or not. It doesn't matter. All these discussions we have here, it doesn't matter. Europe will be part of this turbulent change in the neighborhood. I mean, I'm going now to Munich airport in an hour, and I go into the airplane, go in 3 hours, and 3.5 hours I'm in Cairo. It takes me nearly as long, a bit less to go from here to Munich than it takes me to fly to Cairo. And then I go cross over Tahrir Square and go home. And this is your immediate neighbor. These turbulent processes are happening in your immediate neighborhood, and you will always be connected to it. If you put petrol in your tank, where does it come from? If there are militant organizations coming out of this situation, like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, like many others, they are a security problem for Europe too. And we will not be able to avoid it. We are connected with this Arab neighborhood through migration and refugees, if we like it or not. Desperation on my side of the Mediterranean is always a few centimeters higher than any fence you can do around Europe. And I think that's what we need to understand in discussions here. That we have to start to discuss this as a reality. I've never experienced as a journalist in the last 25 years a time where reality is pushing us ahead like politics and societies like today. I mean, in Austria we discussed, 3 years ago we discussed in this country if Austria takes 500 Syrian war refugees and if possible Christians. That was a discussion in this country 3 years ago. Reality just rolled over us. And it could continue to roll over us. And the question is, for me today, the question is, the only really relevant question is Europe failing in front of this challenge? Or are we growing with this challenge? That's really the only question. Because the discussions we have here, can we like separate ourselves from all these problems? Can we like block all these problems to come to us? That's an illusion. We'll not be able to do that. So the question is, how are we dealing with the reality? How are we managed to get the reality into tracks we can manage in the refugee question, for example? That's the discussions we should have in this country, not the discussions if we can prevent it or not prevent it, because that is, it's an illusion. And I wish we would come to a point, not only in Austria, but also in other places in Europe, where we would start to discuss not the if it happens, but how are we managing it? That's the point where we wasted so much time with useless discussions about if we can prevent it, instead of discussing how are we managing this. And I think another thing that is very important. We always think that the refugee sun is circling around Europe. UNHCR just published the numbers. Worldwide refugees. 39% of refugees worldwide are in the Middle East, in the Arab world. They're living in the Arab world. We have in Lebanon a situation where every fourth, possibly every third person right now is a Syrian refugee. Every fourth person. If I make the calculation for you, beautiful Austria, that's 2 million refugees in Austria. Can you imagine the situation? That's the situation in Lebanon today. 39% of the refugees living today in the Arab world. 29% living in Africa. Places you even never heard about that they are refugees. And 6% living in Europe. So far to the argument the whole world comes to Europe. I mean, just the first 3 months of this year, Uganda, not the richest country in this world, took in 197,000 refugees from southern Sudan. Nearly 200,000 people from southern Sudan. Little Uganda. The same time, there were 20,000 people crossing illegally the Mediterranean to come to Europe. And we were screaming. Yeah? 200,000 people, Uganda, GDP, I don't know, 53 billion, 20,000 Europe, GDP, I don't know how many trillions. That's the difference. I think that's important to see things in perspective, not only to look at your own little world, but to see things really in perspective when we talk about refugees. And the other thing is when I said that the Arab world is always going to be our neighbor if we want or we don't want. There's a saying in Arabic that says Al-Gar aham min al-dar. Also der Nachbar ist wichtiger. The neighbor is more important than the house. So, meaning, if you look for a house or a flat, look at the neighbor first, and then at the flat. Okay. Geographically, it doesn't work. You cannot tell your Arab neighbor in the neighboring flat to leave. He exists geographically right beside you. So the Arab world will be always part of Europe and Europe's problem, and Europe and the West will be always a part of the problem of the Middle East. The Gulf states bought 1 year weapons for $110 billion. Where did they buy these weapons from? Germany just delivered to Egypt 2 submarines for 980 million euros. That's a third of the health budget of Egypt. So we're also part of the problem. And we should never forget that.
Yeah, Andreas Exenberger, University of Innsbruck. Thanks for everything you said, basically. Yeah, here I am. Thanks for everything you said, basically. I have a very brief, but of course complicated question directly following to what you just said. Where in all your journeys in the last years you most clearly felt European presence or absence in all these stories? So you mentioned, for example, when the Egyptian Coast Guard did the job of the Europeans, at least those of the Europeans who wanted to have a wall around Europe, in shooting on refugees, as a very strange example. Besides that, you did hardly mention Europe in your presentation, but of course now you elaborated very much on that. Maybe you have some examples where you can elaborate a bit on how it exactly looks like to feel European absence or presence in these conflicts.
Well, take the refugee question. I mean, Ms. Merkel came to Egypt, and the main discussion was how to improve the capability of Egyptian border control and Coast Guard. I mean, here is Europe outsourcing their problem to somebody else. That's what they try. That's the only answer they can come up with. Outsourcing the problem. Doing camps in North Africa for refugees. Everything but away from us. That's the only answer we found until now to this crisis. The only answer. I mean, for me, we don't have a refugee crisis. We have a crisis of refugee policy. Yeah, because if you talk about absolute numbers of refugees coming to Europe, if you would manage this properly all over Europe, it would be easy. The problem is it's not managed, and most people coming to Sweden, Germany, and Austria, and it's chaos. I mean, if you would be a refugee, where would you go? If nothing is regulated, Romania or Austria, where would you go? I mean, then you cannot tell the refugees, and you cannot blame them if you don't can get a proper policy within Europe. And one of the other things is, I mean, we're complaining that people coming illegally over the Mediterranean, we don't know who's coming, all these things. And of course we don't know who's coming. It's a problem. It's a security problem in Europe, for example. But there are solutions to that. I mean, we don't need camps in North Africa to register refugees. Refugees are registered with UNHCR. They're registered in the camps in Lebanon. They're registered in Europe, in Egypt. They're registered. Their cases are documented. They have to go to many interviews to get the support from UNHCR because that's what they get. They don't get support from the Egyptian government. The Egyptians don't know how to keep their own people afloat. I mean, 4 of 10 Egyptians live with €1 a day. So they are registered, these cases. And there is the possibility of resettlement programs. Resettlement programs where you can, I mean, they have, UNHCR has lists over lists over lists of what they call in the UN jargon the most vulnerable refugees. We're talking about people who were orphans, who were tortured, who were raped, the most vulnerable refugees. Documented. Put them in a resettlement. Only 3% of refugees in Egypt getting into some kind of resettlement program. Living in Egypt as a refugee, I'll give you some examples. A mother, a single educating mother with 4 children doesn't get financial support from UNHCR. She has to have at least 5 children because there's not enough money. And then we have this list of the most vulnerable people who get into a resettlement program. Well, I tell you, it's not enough to be raped one time. You have to be raped more than once, to be considered in this program. I met a family from Darfur in a slum area in Cairo. Misery. The mother was raped while they were on the run. The son disappeared in the streets of Cairo. He didn't come back from work one day. The daughters are sexually harassed working as domestic workers. And one of the neighbors, who is a small police officer, when there is trouble, comes always by with his pistol and threatens them. They would be never reconsidered for a resettlement program. It's not enough. So what are they doing right now? They're trying to save money to send one of them over the Mediterranean to come to Europe. That's their only perspective they have. So these resettlement programs that are barely existing, they would be one of the proper management tools. I would get the most vulnerable refugees, not those who can pay a trafficker. And I can make a security check about them and know who is coming. That would be one of the things. I mean, there are many, many things. There's not a one solution to the problem, but there are. That would be one of the instruments we should start to seriously think about. Now, the resettlement program in Europe basically stopped in the last year. The few places they were in the Turkey deal, and everything else was stopped. There's still like a few dozen resettlement places in the UK and some in Sweden, and that's it. And there are some in Australia and some for Canada, and the US also stopped it with Mr. Trump. What kind of perspective do you give people? And then you're wondering that they're coming over the Mediterranean, risking their life. I mean, like.
There are two more questions. One from.
Hi, my name is Johanna Kostenza from Management Center Innsbruck, and I also work for the UN Women National Committee Austria. And well, for the past 2 years, I think we've been doing fundraising for Satri refugee camp in Jordan, where currently 80,000 Syrian refugees live. And we've been doing fundraising in Austria. And one problem and many comments that we have been facing is from large donors, from companies saying, yes, sure, we will support your project, especially the young women project in this camp. However, please do not mention our names anywhere and do not tell anyone that it is for refugee purposes, for refugee projects. And these are comments we have heard many times, not only from these donors and companies, but also from politicians, from the general public, I would say. So my question to you would be, how do you think could, well, these empathy levels, how could they be improved and raised and increased? Because I think that's what is currently lacking in Austria also and in Europe. And as you've said, that Europe is part of the problem, but should also be part of the solution. This is one question that I always have in mind.
How to raise the empathy level? I mean, I have one question. Just raise your hand. Who chose his or her place of birth? Nobody in the room? I think that's a very important issue. It's just by chance that you are probably born in peaceful, rich, nice, green Austria. You could be as well born in Aleppo or in Mosul or in any other of these miserable places. You could also swim in the Mediterranean and decide which of my children I have to let go. I think that is a very basic thought. The grace of your birthplace. Yeah? A very basic thought. You did absolutely nothing for that you're born here. Nothing. You did nothing. Good. That was, as we say in German, a 6 in lotto. Huh? You won the lottery. That's it. And I think that is one of the things you need to make clear to people. Yeah? To just change the perspective of the whole. And I think it's an embarrassment if people donate money and said, but please don't use my name. I mean, what is that?
There is another question.
Ich habe nur eine kurze, wie lange haben wir Zeit?
20 minutes more? 15 minutes more?
Okay, also ja, okay. Hm?
Okay, 2-3 questions more. There's another question coming in from the virtual plenary saying, how can voicing out sensitive human stories be combined, combined with professional standard of objectivity from a journalist's point of view?
Well, I think sometimes objectivity is mixed up with distance. Huh? For me, a good journalistic story is a story where you in Austria are leaning back in your TV chair and ask yourself a very simple question. What would I do in this situation? What would I think? What would I feel in this situation? When I managed to do a story like that, then I did a good journalistic story. I don't know, where is the objectivity with a story of Soha swimming in the Mediterranean and having to decide which of her children she has to let go? I think I try to tell stories along people, because people understand best stories along people. I can also stand here and analyze for you for 2 hours in a lecture the situation in the Middle East. I can do that too, and I do this too also in television and in my work. So I think objectivity is not distance to the people. And I think good journalism is if you make people to the subjects of their own life, of their own story. Let them tell their story. Don't make them into objects far distant away. Make them into subjects to tell their own story. I do nothing more. I'm not saying, don't take sides, just make them into a subject to tell their own story. That's for me good journalism.
Rachel Meiner from Diakonie Flüchtlingsdienst. Returning to the topic of children and women, as you mentioned, and of course it's understandable, in countries of war there's very little offer of working with traumatized children and women on a therapeutic maybe level. But what would interest me is if you have heard of or seen local initiatives of people who are building something up for traumatized children, for example, or women, as you mentioned, the example of Maria.
Mm-hmm.
When she sings, she doesn't stutter. Have you seen initiatives that try to dock onto these kind of strengths? And if so, can you share some of them, and how can they best be supported?
Well, to be frank, there is very little. Very, very little. I was, after the interview with Mariam, I was trying to find a way what to do with her. Because for me, one of the most difficult things is you sit with her and she gives you this interview, and then what do you say? Like, thank you very much for your time. This is this moment where as a journalist you feel completely helpless. So trying to find what to do with her, and calling around, and even via social media to find something. It ain't easy. There was some Kurdish gentleman who basically connected her to a therapist in the next big town. But that was just by chance. There are very few places. and the need is huge. So, I mean, endless work you can do there. Because one of the things is when we talk about war and effects of war, we talk about how many people died, how many people were injured, destruction of houses, hospitals, other things. One factor where we normally never talk about because you cannot quantify it is the destruction of heads in a war. Every war destroys heads. And like a civil war, like in Syria going on for so many years, destroys so many heads. How do you fix this again? Because these destroyed heads often are the seed for the next conflict in the next generation. And that's, I think, we need to do much more, much more, to catch the destroyed heads in situations like this. It's still like priority number 5. I think it's a very important priority. And there are a few organizations who work on this. For example, there's also in Austria, there's an organization which I really like. It's Hemayat, an organization of therapists, psychologists, and so on, who doing work with traumatized war victims and refugees. I think it's very important work. But there's so much to be done. And more important is the work there. And there's hardly anything.
Hier Lisette Greier. Ich arbeite hier in SOS Kinderdorf. Und ich habe das alles gehört. Eine Sache ist es, das sind schreckliche Geschichten. Das passiert in jedem Krieg, sicher. Das ist auch hier passiert in Österreich und in Deutschland, in der Zweiten Weltkrieg. Und vielleicht sollte man überlegen, wie hat sich Deutschland und Österreich auch von diesen schrecklichen Ergebnissen rausgekommen. Sie sind dort, wir sind hier, wir sehen oft nicht die Sachen, wie es sich passiert. Und einerseits ich als normale Menschen hier, vielleicht habe ich auch bestimmte Verantwortung auch dagegen, aber ich fühle mich machtlos, etwas dagegen zu machen. Besonders auch wenn in diese Länder ganz eine andere Kultur, ganz andere Religionen, ganz andere gegenüber die Frauen, eine ganz andere Art zu sein, gibt es im Leben. Viele politische Sachen dahinter stecken. Man fühlt sich echt ganz machtlos, hier was zu machen. Und natürlich, wenn man so Wohlstand hat, auch hier in Österreich, wie soll ich sagen, es ist menschlich, wie Sie gesagt haben, man weiß oft nicht, okay, das ist mein Haus, man verteidigt sich, das ist mein Haus und ich schaue, wer da reinkommt und so weiter. Und das ist die natürliche Einstellung, die man hat, auch oft gegenüber diese ganzen Massenleute, die kommen, wir wissen nicht, wer kommt, man will sich automatisch schützen. Also, erstens sollte man vielleicht lernen, wie sind andere Länder von diesen Kriegen ausgekommen, vielleicht. Zweitens, in diesem Mittel sind so viele politische Interesse, internationale Interesse dahinten. Und du hier in Europa, du fühlst dich sehr machtlos oft, was zu unternehmen, irgendwie. Wie soll man sich dagegen stellen? Jeder Mensch will sein Leben so gut wie möglich weiterführen. Und ich höre diese Geschichten, die sind traumatisiert, oft lieber will man nichts hören, weil das stört mich und ich habe keine Macht, etwas dagegen zu machen. Es steckt sehr viele politische und sehr viele, wie ich schon gesagt habe, internationale Konflikte, Kulturen. Ich würde sicher auch nicht wählen können, welche meine Kinder sterben sollten. Gar nicht, ich würde sicher alle 4 halten. Ich würde, wenn ich Flüchtling wäre, würde sicher Österreich aussuchen zu leben. Und ich würde vielleicht sogar stellen, um meine Kinder zu ernähren. Das ist es. Es ist sehr kompliziert. Und sie sind dort. Wenn ich dort bin, ich glaube, ich würde versuchen, viel zu machen, aber oft hier ist. Ja. Das sind die ganzen Gedanken, die mir dieser Vortrag gebracht haben. Danke.
Das war mehr ein Statement, da muss ich, glaube ich, nicht darauf antworten. Das war,
Sie sprechen das, Marie-Louise Bocconi, ich bin eine Privatperson, also in der Zwischenzeit in Pension und habe erfahren von Ihrem Vortrag und habe mich deswegen angemeldet. Sie sprechen davon, dass die Versuche der europäischen Staaten, der EU, ja völlig hilflos sind. Immer dieses Abschotten, Abschotten, Abschotten. Man hat es ja auch in den vergangenen Jahren gesehen, dass trotzdem wesentlich mehr Menschen kommen, dass das Abschotten einfach nicht machbar ist. Was sind nach Ihrer Meinung oder was wären, vorausgesetzt die EU wäre sich einig, weil es kann ja auch sein, dass unter Umständen die Europäische Union an dieser Frage auch zerbrechen kann. Sie haben es ja auch kurz angesprochen. Aber was wären nach Ihrer Meinung nach wesentliche Schritte und wesentliche Maßnahmen, die ergriffen werden können, um dem Thema des Flüchtlingswesens, um den Flüchtlingen mit diesem Thema auch menschengerecht und im Sinne einer Stabilität auch umgehen zu können und das auch regeln zu können. Ich weiß, Sie sind kein Politiker, aber Sie haben so viel Erfahrung, auch viel Erfahrung in Ländern, wie Bereiche ähnlich geregelt wurden. Und ich denke mir, Sie haben da sicher auch Antworten dazu.
I think there are several levels. I mean, first, there is no perfect recipe for anything. Still, we have to deal with the reality. But there is no perfect recipe to do this. There's a few levels where I have to think about and what I have to maybe move towards to. The first level is a very personal level. It's the level of refugees coming to Austria, refugees showing up at your workplace, refugees becoming your neighbor, refugees going to school with you or with your children. So you're going to be confronted with the issues of refugees on a very personal level. And everyone has to decide for him or herself how to deal with the situation on a very personal level, because if it not already did, it will reach your life. The second is the level, what I said in Europe, the crisis of, not the refugee crisis, but the crisis of refugee policy. I mean, it's obvious what has to happen. I mean, you have to have a kind of key how you divide refugees up in Europe. There is no other solution to it. We have to come to this point. And the third level is, if I would argue that the boat is full in Europe, if I would argue the boat is full in Europe, I have to make sure that other boats like the one in Lebanon and other places that took many more refugees than Europe are not sinking. I mean, we had a situation, when the refugees suddenly came to Europe, to Austria in this fateful autumn of, I think, 2 years ago, it was a bit like an earthquake or a natural catastrophe or something came upon us. It was obvious that this is going to happen. I mean, we had a situation in that very same year where UNHCR and World Food Program had less money available than the year before. We had food rations cut in Lebanon and in camps in Jordan. That was the situation. And then suddenly, like a few months later, we're wondering why all these people are coming. So that's the third level. I mean, we have to support the countries which took many more refugees than Europe did. And then the fourth level, and that's the complicated, helpless level. I mean, it's very obvious that you have to stop the conflicts that produce refugees. Very easy said, very difficult to do. I could speak now another 2 hours about how to end the war in Syria. And the fifth level is something we didn't even start to think about. We're not only talking about refugees from war. We're talking what I call refugees from poverty. I mean, here somehow the bill is presented to us for decades and decades of global inequality. That's the bill for it. And we didn't even start to discuss how to deal with this situation. I mean, there's always this kind of general sentences, we have to develop Africa in order to avoid, but that's a very cheap sentence. What does it mean? Because that's really, at the end, what it is for us. And it's very human. I mean, there's two things. We are like scared because all the strangers are coming, and they're different than we are. And the second is, I don't want to give anything up I have. That's really the two very human, I think it would be, that's not a European trait, it's a human, a human thing. Yeah? So we didn't even start on the fifth level, how to address global inequality. That leads now to, that's the bill for it. So that's the 5 levels we have to discuss how to deal with reality in all 5 levels. Instead of discussing how can we prevent reality from happening.
Only a couple of minutes left. Last question, okay.
Nestle Jenny, SOS Kinderdorf Österreich. Also für meinen Geschmack berichten die Medien ja viel zu wenig über so Einzelschicksale. Das ist das, was meiner Meinung nach berührt, was vielleicht den Menschen ein bisschen auch zum Umdenken bringen würde. Man hört, ja, da sind 10 Leute gestorben, da 100, 300, man ist total abgestumpft. Und ja, also Frage, oder wie sehen Sie das, oder wäre es irgendwo ein Ziel auch, dass man vielleicht sowas einfach auch ein bisschen öfter oder vielleicht schaue ich auch zu wenig fern oder keine Ahnung, aber mir kommt einfach vor, dass das eine Abgestumpftheit ist mit diesen Zahlen und dass genau sowas, das was Sie heute da erzählt und gezeigt haben, einfach eine viel größere Wirkung hätte. Ob Sie da Möglichkeit sehen, dass man da vielleicht auch in der Berichterstattung andere Fokusse setzen könnte.
I told you what I think is a good journalistic story, in my opinion. I must say that it's not easy to place this story. Because if I have a news program, the main news in this country is 17 minutes long. And so I have a story of 1 minute 20 and 1 minute 30. I didn't even have time to introduce Soha. I'm often in a situation when you have a live talk with television. Karim explained to me the Arab world in 1 minute 30. See, this is very frustrating because I think actually that we have to do exactly what you said. And that means that you have to have a bit more space. You have to give it more time. Not this rush, and short, and quick, as we are doing in journalism right now. But that needs a different kind of news shows. Yeah? I would even argue, I mean, they are discussing, not only in Austria, but also in Germany, it's like the average viewer of the news program is Stone Age. It's like, I think it's 55 or even higher plus. the average viewer of ZIP 1 in the main news program in this country. That's not an Austrian problem. We have the same thing in Germany. Just watch in Germany second channel news, ZDF, Heute Journal or Heute, and watch the blocks of advertisement around it. I mean, ask your doctor and pharmacist. I mean, what generation is watching this news? So I think that it's exactly that what we have to do. Because also, especially the young people, they got the main news all through the internet. We have to find an added value to what the things they already read all day long in the internet. And I think it's exactly that kind of stories, or background, or analysis. It doesn't have to be only like personal stories, but just putting things into a perspective. Yeah? This information we are bombarded with. What do I do with the information that 100 people are dead with this bomb attack in this city? I need to have it needs to be framed, it needs to be put in a context, it needs to be put into, okay, what can I do in these situations? What kind of influence do I have? And this kind of stuff. I think that's the question people have. And that's, I think, the things we should address as journalists.
If I can ask, please, a very brief question and the last question. From your personal experience as a journalist, especially in the region of the Middle East, have you had any successful cooperation or with any NGO in that area? If yes, what really made it successful?
You mean a successful work of an NGO?
Yeah.
But you asked me now.
Just very brief, very brief.
Brief answer. I mean, it is obvious that there are many NGOs who do very, very important work. Yeah? Who do work where there are no state actors. And as more we have failed states and civil wars and not functioning states, as more this kind of NGO work will become important. I mean, look at a place like Yemen, for example. Medical work in Yemen, who does that? People like Médecins Sans Frontières. Public health system is was never really strong, but even now, even more destroyed. So non-state actors becoming more and more important. Same thing in Syria, in many places. And of course you have a situation but then you have a situation like Yemen, 7 million people starving. That's actually too big for NGOs to deal with. Then you have this big conferences, this money is pledged that at the end never arrives and all this stuff. But I think that NGOs, generally speaking, becoming more and more important in this world because we have so many failed state systems, so many failed health systems, so many failed education systems. So NGO work is important and will become, I think, even more important.
Thank you so much. I think he deserves a round of applause, please. How do we address social reality? How do we address global inequality? Karim gave us some 2 or 3 important points. One, journalist, he said, concentrate on events rather than the processes and dynamics present in societies. Solution to the refugee problem and crisis. He's saying we have crisis of management of refugee issues and not crisis of refugees. Therefore, the resettlement program, if taken honestly, can be a good solution. Then, that most often we mix distance with objectivity. And I think this is where we have to concentrate more. What is objective and what role does distance play? Does distance bring the role of being a spectator? And in the process of being a spectator, the problem of pictures and images we're talking about come in. Therefore, to really address social justice and address social issues, bring development, as he said it here, NGOs are playing a great role and still going to play a great role. How are those roles going to be, in which region and where? I think these questions are then open to us to reflect and carry on. Thank you, Karim. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
God bless.
Thank you.